Yes, that's great, Michael. We can see your slides, and you are welcome to start.
Great. Well, you know, when we think about entrepreneurship, there are various conceptualizations, but the most basic is the activity of creating a venture. The popular academic conceptualization focuses on recognizing and capitalizing upon opportunity. The well-known and concise but inspiring Harvard perspective that it's the pursuit of opportunity regardless of resources controlled. The definition that we like to use, which is the process of creating value through unique resource combinations to exploit or capitalize on opportunity. And these are all important definitions and important perspectives, but I think simply looking at entrepreneurship as a process, simply looking at entrepreneurship as venture creation or opportunity recognition and exploitation, I think that understates and undersells what entrepreneurship is about. I think we have to think of entrepreneurship to realize its true potential as empowerment and transformation. And so what do I mean by that? Empowerment is about creating your own job, your own identity, your own future, your own wealth, creating your own sense of pride and self-worth, your own facilities and operations, creating jobs for others, creating an ability to contribute to communities, to your neighborhood, to your society, and to give back. And when we talk about transformation by entrepreneurs means about transforming markets and business practices, transforming industries, transforming oneself, transforming families, communities, transforming economies. And so the more we start to realize the empowering, I think the more we will have. And so I'm getting messages saying I've been muted and unmuted, so I'm not sure what's going on. But
we can hear you.
Okay.
So at the screen, and Abdullah, be watchful and mute anybody who speaks.
Yes, sir.
Yes, please carry on, Michael.
Okay. So if we think about empowerment and we think about transformation, what does this have to do with poverty? And if we look at the poverty challenge today, you know, people like to applaud the fact that globally poverty levels are down over the last 30 years, but 22% of the world's population live in poverty if we define that as earning less than $3.20 a day. 10%, 1 out of 10 people, or 734 million people, live in extreme poverty, less than $1.90 a day. Today in the modern world, in our technological world, of 1,000 children born, 39 will die before they're 5 years old. A third of the urban population in the world lives in a slum. With the COVID situation, we're going to see poverty rates go up for the first time since 1998 and globally. With COVID, we're going to see that the poor are not only affected more dramatically, but the impact on the poor will last a decade or longer. And so what we're seeing is much of the progress made over the last 10 years is being undone. What we see around the world is that governments literally spend trillions of dollars on poverty alleviation, whether that's for housing or clean water or health. But the bottom line is poverty rates remain unacceptably high. And in developed countries, the United States is a case in point, the poverty rate is 14% and has remained steady at 14% since 1965. And the bigger issue is, as we see global economic development, the gap between the poor and the rest of society, between the haves and the have-nots, only continues to get larger. So what about a different solution? What about entrepreneurship as a solution to poverty? In addition to all the other kinds of approaches and ways in which money gets spent by governments and NGOs and others. So let's talk a little bit about entrepreneurship as a solution to poverty. The beginning point is to understand that poverty is a lot more than just an inability to pay for things. So the poor have less education, less access to educational resources. They experience more crime. They are more often single parents or have high teen birth rates. They have more serious health challenges, and we see this with the COVID, much more affecting the poor than everybody else. They have a more difficult time finding and getting jobs. You know, the unemployment rate amongst Black males in South Africa is 50%. They tend to suffer more in economic downturns. Poverty is about two things: scarcity and vulnerability. And what we're seeing, and so that scarcity creates a short-term orientation. If I don't have enough to eat this week and I don't have money, I'm so focused on the immediate term, on today. How do you expect me to write a 3-year business plan? How do you expect me to think long-term or strategically when I come from a survival and a scarcity kind of mindset? The poor are less integrated into society. Their social networks are much more constrained. And so if we take these characteristics of poverty, not just lack of money, but the whole picture, what we see is it has big implications for entrepreneurship. And so think about the entrepreneur's opportunity horizon. That is to say, the set of opportunities that they're able to perceive at a point in time. Their opportunity horizons are far more limited to the world they live in.
Professor Michael, we
I'm sorry,
hear you.
somebody is interrupting. I didn't hear what you said. Yes?
We lost
Yep.
your...
Please carry on. Please carry on, Michael. Yes. Yes. Okay. Abdullah, please make sure that stay on top. Michael, carry on.
So if we think about the effect of poverty conditions on somebody trying to start a business, we start from the predicate that their opportunity horizons are more constrained. And I'm going to build on that theme in a moment. It affects the kinds of ventures that they start. It affects the amount of time they have to spend on the venture. They typically are not able to access whatever kinds of entrepreneurial ecosystems might exist. In fact, our own research shows that entrepreneurial ecosystems largely discriminate against or ignore the poor, and are prioritizing other kinds of entrepreneurs and ventures. Their ability to plan the kind of markets and the limited buying capacity of the markets that they sell in, the resources they're able to leverage or access, and the returns they're able to generate. And so let's talk a little bit about the evidence, because this, to me, is an exciting area for research. There is a shocking lack of research. There's a very, very limited amount of data available regarding entrepreneurship as it relates to those in poverty. Poverty statistics themselves are not that great in many parts of the world, and data on ventures started by people who are in poverty at the time they start their venture is extremely scarce. But we can start to paint a bit of a picture. And so there is evidence, for instance, that some people think that the poor start fewer ventures than the rest of society. The evidence is mixed, but there's actually evidence to suggest that the poor may have a higher startup rate than society at large. An interesting study by Slavinsky using Kaufman data found a low-income entrepreneurship rate of 0.38% in the United States compared to a national average of 0.30. Other research shows that minorities are more heavily represented among the poor, and they have higher startup rates. An interesting study, data using the panel study of entrepreneurial dynamics found where the poor represent 14% of the US population, they're 17% of nascent entrepreneurs. So, and there's other evidence, global evidence, to also, it's more anecdotal, but to suggest that the startup rates amongst the poor are not necessarily lower, and they may be higher. Beyond this, there's evidence to suggest that where entrepreneurship rates are higher, poverty goes down faster. And so in one study, for every percentage point increase in the rate of entrepreneurship, there's a 2% decline in the poverty rate. Other evidence that suggests that a difference is made when low-income people start ventures found that 72% of poor entrepreneurs not only were able to consistently increase their income over 5 years, but enough for half of them to move out of poverty and become less dependent on other sources of support. There's also an interesting argument. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the work of Scott Shane, but Shane and a number of others make the argument that the ventures of the poor do not matter. In the scheme of things, we should only be focused on high-tech, high-growth, scalable kind of enterprises. And I think that's not only short-sighted thinking, I think it's incorrect thinking. But the argument is that the ventures of the poor tend to be highly inefficient and not the best uses of societal resources, which I just think is inane. The reality is these ventures play a number of critical roles. They serve market niches in the marketplace that otherwise would be ignored by incumbent companies or by scalable high-tech startups. They enhance the competitive environment, they pay taxes, they stabilize neighborhoods. These are businesses that are frequently immersed in the community, and so they're an important part of the fabric of a community. They provide an amazing developmental experience for the entrepreneur himself or herself. They provide a living, a source of income for oneself, for one's family, and for others. They're not big job creators. And the bigger argument is without these kind of ventures, the overall landscape of venture creation would suffer significantly. That is to say, these ventures play an important role within the overall mix of ventures. And I want to talk about that. But as a case in point, for every company today like Uber, you need hundreds of thousands of Uber drivers. Every one of those Uber drivers is running a little micro enterprise. And so there is this interdependency that we need to be aware of. So that's the other thing I want to emphasize, that we're not talking about the next Facebook. And this is a big problem because increasingly, a lot of what we teach about entrepreneurship, a lot of the tools we use, like the lean startup, are just inappropriate tools and do not address the real needs of supporting the ventures started by the poor. We have a new book that's just come out about a month ago called What Do Entrepreneurs Create? And in the book, we focus on 4 different types of ventures created by entrepreneurs: survival ventures, lifestyle ventures, managed growth ventures, and aggressive growth ventures. This distinction is critically important And the failure to make this distinction undermines an awful lot of the published work in entrepreneurship, the research, here's why. If you think about the kinds of ventures created by entrepreneurs, and in this table, I give you a brief picture of what we talk about in the book, but think about a survival venture. This is a hand-to-mouth venture, a venture that makes enough this week to survive, to pay the bills, to eat. Think about a lifestyle venture. This is the corner hardware store or shoe repair business or restaurant that produces more than survival, that generates an income. Nobody's getting rich, but it does have premises typically, does have employees typically, and generates a decent, potentially decent income. Think about the managed growth business, the business where a person starts, say, a real estate company, and over 10 years they expand and they have 10 and then they have 20 offices and they're focused on commercial real estate and residential real estate. And then think about the aggressive growth venture. This is the Uber, the Facebook, the SpaceX. These are the scalable kind of ventures. Well, first of all, most of our teaching, most of our ecosystems, most of our economic development people are preoccupied with the aggressive growth ventures. And those are exciting ventures. They create as much as 75% of the new jobs in society. They are a big source of innovation, of patents, of intellectual property, but they represent less than 1% of startups. So when you ask the question, what do entrepreneurs create? By and large, they do not create aggressive growth ventures. Only 1% of startups, less than 1%, are aggressive growth. What about the other 99%? First of all, if you take survival and lifestyle ventures constitute about 80% of startups. And so most small businesses start small and stay small. About 15% achieve meaningful growth. Most of those are what we call managed growth businesses, and then the 1%, the aggressive growth. Well, why is this important? First of all, this is not a continuum. Survival ventures don't naturally become lifestyle ventures. Lifestyle ventures don't naturally become managed growth ventures. These are 4 different types of ventures. Their resource requirements are different. Their skill sets needed are different. The kind of competencies necessary, their time horizons, their exit approach, the kind of motives that drive them, the kind of rewards that they produce. Everything about them is unique. And so we think about these 4 types as 4 discrete types. And there's a path dependency. So once you head down the path of a survival venture, you make decisions, you attract resources, you implement things in a way that tends to keep it a survival type of venture. Why does this matter in a discussion about poverty and entrepreneurship? Well, first of all, most of the ventures created by the poor, disproportionately, more than the norm for society, most of these ventures are survival and lifestyle ventures. And so if that's what we're trying to facilitate, if that's what we're trying to teach, if that's what we're trying to assist with, then we need to fundamentally understand the nature of these ventures. The other point is entrepreneurs themselves need to have a sense of what it is I'm trying to build, what it is I'm trying to create. We know that most ventures become something very different than what was intended. That is to say, wherever the entrepreneur starts is not where he ends. He creates something very different than what was intended, what was in his initial plan or intent. But having some idea of where I'm trying to go, am I comfortable and happy and satisfied with a survival venture? Well, then that's a different approach, and we educate differently when it comes to that. So I want to use this as a table setting to then go to our work on poverty and entrepreneurship. And in the book that Shahid was generous enough to mention, our book called Poverty and Entrepreneurship in Developed Economies, our book is predicated on what we call the Spoder Model. And this model suggests that if you want to make a dent in poverty, if entrepreneurship is to represent an effective pathway out of poverty, it starts with supportive infrastructure. And that includes both infrastructure as we normally think about it, educational infrastructure, housing infrastructure, transportation infrastructure. You know, it's hard to encourage a person in poverty to start a business, to come to this training or be part of this incubator if they have no transportation, for instance. But it also, the other part of supportive infrastructure is entrepreneurial ecosystems. We have to adapt our entrepreneurial ecosystems so they serve the poor. Because in many communities around the world, whatever, quote, ecosystem exists, tends to exist to serve other kinds of folks. Our own research shows evidence that ecosystems are underserving women, and ecosystems definitely are underserving the poor. The next is preparation of the entrepreneur, and here we talk about both competency development, entrepreneurial competency, but also literacy issues. So not just functional literacy in terms of reading and writing and numeracy, but technical literacy, financial literacy, economic literacy, business literacy. How do we expand the opportunity horizons of the poor? And I'm going to give you an example of that in a few moments so that they can see opportunities that they otherwise would not see. If I've never had a computer, it's hard to see opportunities in coming up with apps. The next issue is differentiation. As you'll see in a few moments, differentiation is an overarching challenge for the ventures of the poor. And I'm going to explore something called the commodity trap. The economic models of these ventures tend to produce low margin, low volume businesses that can't survive. And then resource leveraging, which is more than effectuation. It's about bootstrapping, it's about leveraging resources, it's about guerrilla skills, but we always focus on money. How do we get more microcredit? How do we get more money when in fact an immense amount of resources can be leveraged, bootstrapped, achieved through guerrilla tactics and so forth. And it's a cycle. It's ongoing as the venture unfolds and emerges. Let me talk a little bit about universities, because I think universities have been absent from much of this discussion, and they need to be at the table. You know, when Shahid was talking about the exciting program at IBA, one of the key parts of the model used at IBA includes a co-curricular component. So how do students learn outside the classroom? And another piece of it is community engagement. How do we engage with the entrepreneurial community? How do we make a difference in our cities and our rural areas and the areas that our universities serve? And so I believe that the program I'm about to describe is a great example of both co-curricular learning opportunities for students, engagement with the entrepreneurial community that makes a difference, and importantly, experiential learning at its best. And so what we've launched is something called the South Bend Entrepreneurship and Adversity Program. It's a university-based program, but it includes about 17 partners, both across the campus and in the community. We've also launched a version of this in Gainesville, Florida, in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. There's one about to launch in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. So it's a model that is replicable in other places. The model centers on 6 key components: a training component that evolves over 6 weeks, and then a monthly follow-up, a mentoring component involving successful entrepreneurs, a consulting component involving students, where students do on-the-ground things like create websites, register businesses, create bookkeeping systems, and so forth, a microcredit piece, a piece we call Community Connect that connects low-income entrepreneurs to the larger business community. both for the purpose of doing business together, but also resource sharing. Some of these established businesses can do back office operations for some of these low income entrepreneurs, for instance. And then finally, there's a tracking piece, a research piece, where we track these ventures for three years on 25 metrics. You know, one of the questions that you use in many of these discussions is how do you evaluate the effectiveness of these kind of programs? And unfortunately, we focus too much on outcome metrics. We focus on things like how many ventures got started, how many employees did they have, how many had premises, how much money did they attract to start up and grow. I think you have to use process metrics. And so we have identified 80 activity-based process metrics, and we track these entrepreneurs as they develop a business model, register a business, get an employer identification number, open a business bank account, establish supplier relationships, and so forth. Because our belief is if we can help these entrepreneurs take 10 steps, holding their hand together, those 10 steps will lead that entrepreneur to take 20 steps on their own. And so our program is all about how do you leverage campus resources. So for instance, how do we involve our law school in helping these low-income entrepreneurs? How do we involve our computer scientists in helping these low-income entrepreneurs? And how do you leverage community resources? And so we have a lot of relationships and partnerships to leverage everything from financial literacy training to procurement opportunities with the city and with the university. It's a 12-month intervention program. I've talked about some of the pieces and parts, but it also heavily involves students. So it's a huge learning opportunity for the students. You know, I'll give you a good example of some of the spillover benefits of these kind of programs. We all went to online teaching when the COVID virus forced the shutdown of the economy. And I use a lot of case studies from these low-income entrepreneurs that just bring online discussions alive, because they're not Harvard cases that are 5 years old. They're real cases happening right now. And so the students are much more engaged and excited because as they work through case discussions, they're coming up with solutions that are real solutions that these entrepreneurs can use right now. These are basic businesses. They tend to be survival businesses. Some are lifestyle businesses, but they're simple businesses. They're not typically tech-based. They're not typically scalable. That happens every once in a while, but that's not our focus. And one of the big problems with these businesses is what we call the commodity trap. And I think this is a global issue with ventures started by low-income or people in poverty. The commodity trap refers to a situation where it's like starting a cleaning business where I clean homes. It's undifferentiated. There's intense competition, low entry barriers. I'm setting prices too low, and the poor typically underprice. It's labor intensive, and I'm not using much technology or much equipment in the business. And so my unit costs are high, my prices are low, my margins are squeezed. I can't differentiate. I have no bargaining power with my suppliers, so I'm buying in small lot sizes for high costs. The upshot is I'm stuck in this commodity trap, and I end up with low volumes and low margins and an inability to survive. And so much of our training and the work we do, the tools that we've developed, are about this commodity trap and how you overcome it. The point I'm trying to make is the toolkit that everybody seems to be moving towards, things like the lean startup or the business model canvas, these tools either don't apply or have to be significantly adapted to apply to the circumstance of the poor. The challenge is one of expanding opportunity horizons, developing more viable profit models, modifying ecosystems to accommodate the needs of the ventures of the poor. It's about twofold, not just let's fix the business problems, let's help your idea become more viable, but also let's work on the entrepreneur himself or herself. So the person and the venture, a dual focus in terms of the efforts. And what's key to all of this, and what's key especially to all of this in the time of COVID, is the theme of this whole course that IBA is offering, and that is the importance of this entrepreneurial mindset. We have to start to think about, in fact, I can tell you from many years of experience, I can teach somebody how to set up a simple bookkeeping system, how to segment their market, how to use social media, how to achieve quality control and production. Much tougher is helping them develop and nurture the entrepreneurial mindset. This is not a thing that just naturally happens. It has to be reinforced. It has to be developed. When we start thinking about, how to look at resources differently and leverage resources and engage in guerrilla kind of tactics and continually adapt, constantly making mistakes, but quickly learning on the fly and adapting. This mindset is the key to the whole thing. And my last point, and I'm happy to take any questions, but my last point is to invite anybody who's interested, if you have an interest in poverty and entrepreneurship is a vehicle, a pathway out of poverty. We've launched something called the GPPE, the Global Partnership for Poverty and Entrepreneurship. I'm about, within the next 10 days, I will launch the website, but it will be a resource hub where anybody interested in research, in teaching, in case studies, anybody interested in community engagement and community engagement tools, microcredit, what have you, we'll have a one-stop website resource for free for anybody who would like to. So it's meant to encourage work on poverty entrepreneurship, encourage more collaboration among scholars and nonprofit leaders and others. So if you're interested in GPPE, please send me an email. And with that, that's my presentation. I'd love to take any questions.
Oh, great. Thanks, Michael. And it was a great honor for us. And we have people from all over the world, from people from Africa. Moses Ngoze think he's from, I don't know from which country, maybe Nigeria. And we have people from, Friday, Opka, from all over the world, all over the country. So you've provided us a great platform and opportunity to interact. So I'll be reading some questions and from the chat box. Okay, so Kevin Mulcahy, he's your neighbor in Boston, Babson College. And he says, question, how does Michael feel about, where is this? How does Michael feel about the growth of microfunding and microfinancing sites? Microfinance, yes.
Yeah, that's a controversial question. The whole microcredit movement has exploded, but also had its own externalities or spillover effects that aren't always positive. And so one can't just embrace microcredit as a be-all, end-all solution, and yet it's important. I think the evidence tells us that it's most effective when it's coupled with hands-on engagement with the people that microcredit is being provided to. Obviously, there are a bunch of different models, the sort of Grameen social model, other kind of models. I don't think we know enough about the relative effectiveness of these different models, but I do think we know that microcredit is an important piece of the puzzle, and a piece, though, that works if it's coupled with training and mentoring and incubation and other pieces and parts, that it's not just about money.
Great. So we have Ahmed Osman, the president of ICSB, is with us today, International Council for Small Business. Ahmed Osman, can you please come on screen and just say a few words, and the whole Pakistan will be great to see you, Ahmed Osman, and you can comment anything about the talk, please. Okay, so we can. So there's a question that we have from the people from Nigeria, Austria. Welcome from my friends. Okay, and Puerto Rico, people from Puerto Rico, and the question is, can we collaborate in R&D in East Africa? There's a friend, Moses, is asking from East Africa.
Well, I know
Moses,
Moses.
can you repeat your question? You can. Yeah, you know him.
Moses, he's an old friend, and it's good to see you.
So
I'm not sure what the question is, though. I mean, I certainly think we want to collaborate with what you're doing in East Africa, but I'm not sure if there's more to the question.
Okay, so so people are asking for site, and so I think we will inform them as we get some. Great. So the question is, how did your earlier career choices lead you to where you are now, Morris? They're talking about you. How did your earlier career how did your earlier career choices brought you where you are now?
Yeah. Well, that's a long question, and I'm trying to be short in my answer. I studied economics, and my frustration studying economics was they always talked in economics about 4 factors of production: land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurship, but then they proceeded to focus on 3 of those and ignore the entrepreneurship one. So the reason I ultimately got a PhD in marketing was it got me closer to entrepreneurship. Because back in those days, you didn't get PhDs in entrepreneurship. But our work over the years has always focused on ventures of all types, and certainly we've done our share of work trying to encourage scalable enterprises. But from the very beginning, the issue of entrepreneurship and its potential to change the world, the issue of entrepreneurship and its empowering potential has intrigued me, and especially in looking at its application with the people in society that are most at risk, with the people in society that face the most adversity. And so we've done, over the years, our research has been filled with perspectives that include women, include the townships in South Africa, and other contexts where people face adverse conditions. Now, obviously, all entrepreneurs face adversity, but if you start from a position of disadvantage, then to me, that's far more exciting and more interesting. I think in the scheme of things, if you've got a cool technology, making a success out of that is probably easier than how do you take somebody who cleans houses and make that a viable venture and understand how to adapt our tools and concepts to that. So it's just something I'm passionate about, always have been passionate about. Early on, long before I should have, in a logical career path, I was the editor of the Journal of Developmental Entrepreneurship, where our whole focus was entrepreneurship under conditions of adversity. And so it sort of influenced my whole career approach.
There's one more question. Do you think the world will move towards green economy and ethical investments in post-corona?
Yeah, I mean, green economy means different things to different people. And what are the environmental issues are not, they're different in urban China today or rural India today than they are in North America. I mean, obviously, we have to care about our planet, and green entrepreneurship is a piece of the puzzle in terms of the solution. But it's a much more complex issue. I mean, you have one extreme in the environmental movement is an anti-development stream, and how do you end development and yet help many of the people in the world? It's just a messy issue, an important issue. So yeah, I think green entrepreneurship will feature more prominently. Where you can build business models that work and make sense, and where we start to, think about it. I think to embrace the complexity that surround those issues.
There's a related question that doesn't entrepreneurship under capitalism creates inequality? Entrepreneurship will not go for the very need of society if it can't generate good profit. So he's asking, doesn't entrepreneurship under capitalism creates inequality?
No, I don't think so. I believe that if we look at different economic systems, and how they evolve over time, I believe that the basic free market offers the most potential to help the most people in the world uplift themselves, and I think that's the lesson of history. Entrepreneurship is not a source of inequality. To me, what's beautiful about entrepreneurship is that it is democratic, and so whether you're rich or poor, whether you're black or white or of some other racial background, whether you're gay or straight, entrepreneurship doesn't discriminate between ethnicity and race or anything else, and that's why I think it's so empowering in terms of its potential.
So there are a lot of questions coming up. People are really taking a lot of interest, Michael, and one has asked a question that universities are still preparing people for jobs. So that's a big hurdle. What needs to be done with universities?
Well,
what will happen with them?
I agree with you. It's always been a problem. In building entrepreneurship programs at different universities, when we created the School of Entrepreneurship at Oklahoma State, I'm always amused when the person from career planning and development, the person who's supposed to help students get jobs, comes and says, well, what do I do with you? You guys don't, you create your own jobs. And I think there's a naivete about the value of entrepreneurship education for careers and jobs of all types, including starting your own venture. But the bigger challenge to me is that I really want to keep my focus on the poor, and ask yourself which of these paths is more natural. Is it more natural to get a job where I'm paid way less than I'm worth, to get a job that has no opportunity for advancement or personal development, to get a job where I have no job security, a job where when things go bad, I'm the first one that they get rid of, to get a job where I have few or no benefits in terms of health insurance or retirement or anything else? Is that a more natural path than entrepreneurship? And I think entrepreneurship is the much more natural path for the person in poverty. And we just don't think that way. We think purely about creating job training. And I'm not arguing against job training. That's important. It's valuable. It's just we need to that's why I use the word empower. And I know the word empower is overused and abused, but I truly believe in self-empowerment through entrepreneurship. So not arguing against job training, just I think we have to expand the toolkit.
So Kevin is working in South America, and he again asked the question, what advice do you have for all of us to support local micro entrepreneurs? As a professor, as a governmental person, what needs to be done as a teacher, professor, or somebody else?
Yeah. Well, I think it goes to the essence of how we see ourselves as educators and as scholars. Quite honestly, having done this for 40 years, business problems are business problems. And, you know, I will never forget one of my close colleagues that used to work with us. He's retired now, but we do a program in South Africa every year for 6 weeks where we work with historically disadvantaged entrepreneurs in the townships outside of Cape Town. You know, and this guy is what we call a professor of practice or clinical professor, but he was a highly successful entrepreneur. You know, and we're on the ground and we're working with very basic businesses. And his point is, you know, Mike, the more we do this, the more I realize business is business. And the problems that I faced in running a $1 billion company and the problems this guy's facing in his simple micro enterprise, they're different dimensions and scope and scale and so forth, but the basic nuts and bolts are not all that different. And so to me, we need to engage micro enterprises. We need to use those as case studies. We need to bring them into our classrooms. We need to. I know I'm promoting our own work, but I think this distinction between the 4 types of ventures has huge implications, because if you look at the published research in entrepreneurship and you look very carefully at their sampling and what they say and what they don't say about their sampling, the fact is they're mixing apples and oranges in terms of the kind of ventures that they include in their sampling. And so I think both from a scholarly standpoint and from a teaching and engaging student standpoint, we should not look at this as a little side piece of entrepreneurship and let's focus on SpaceX or the more glamorous. I think this is the more glamorous.
Great. So there are a lot of students here in the accounting and finance students and undergrad students, and they're asking for any advice while they're studying in the undergrad program, studying business. So any advice while they're studying? Will they do any advice as a senior person?
Well, my advice is to get as exposed to entrepreneurship as you can. First of all, I think it offers such potential, both in terms of interdisciplinary thinking, in terms of experiential learning. So I think that's a key thing. I think I would encourage, if I'm a student, to make my education as experiential as I can. So I would try to get as involved as I can with consulting to small businesses, to emerging enterprises, to interning, working with entrepreneurs and small businesses. I think the underlying competencies that are critical to entrepreneurship are key to career success, no matter what path you take. And so, you know, we don't teach enough, especially in the business school outside of entrepreneurship, about things like risk mitigation, about things like opportunity recognition, about things like leveraging resources. You know, it's really quite stunning to me how much time we spend on things like venture capital and angel investing, when overwhelming majority of small businesses succeed without ever having any venture capital or angel investor investment. And so why is that? And what is the reality of how they manage their cash flow needs and so forth? So I again apologize for going on so long, but that'd be my short advice. The other thing, and I think it's critical to your focus at IBA on effectuation, we need to understand that the old model in entrepreneurship of write a business plan, execute the business plan, and make money just doesn't apply. Doesn't work. Ventures emerge. When you're doing anything novel or new, there's an emergent property to it. And the nature of emergence is such that what emerges is different than from what is intended. And I think there's a lot to learn by experiencing that emergence and understanding how the key to success in business is not necessarily having all-seeing vision like Superman or whatever, but the ability to constantly make mistakes, constantly experiment, constantly learn on the fly and adjust and tweak and get where you ultimately get to. Anyway, that's my 2 cents worth.
We have a few more minutes. Any other question? So please make sure that, great. So, so we'll be open to IBA Center for Entrepreneurial Development at IBA Karachi, Pakistan. We are working to help a lot of people. We have a 200 million population in Pakistan, and the government, of course, cannot provide jobs to that much people. And Hans, can you please ask a question? Can you ask Mike, because I couldn't find it. Hans Gulish from Bangkok. Hans, can you please ask your questions? Open your mic. So there's a question. How can you work with universities in Nigeria? So this is Friday Okpara. So Friday, I think the website address is available. And
yeah. I think there was a problem
yes,
there.
I'm back. Yes.
The GPPE site is, as I say, will be operational within 10 days, but people are welcome to send me an email. The email address is on that last slide, and I'm also happy to share those slides if you would like with anybody that is interested, or you can email me directly, or I can just send them to Shahid.
I would just share and need your comments on our experience, Morris. We've gradually found out that entrepreneurship was as old as human beings. They were found on this earth. So we need to find out, and everybody has to go and find out their own local heroes, the traditional people who have been working in the farms, in the deserts, and doing creative things like, hello? Hello?
You are audible, you are audible.
Okay, so how can, so in Pakistan, what we are trying to do is we're finding our local stories in the farmlands and livestock and agriculture, and then trying to look at our local poetry and local anecdotal stories in the culture. And so we found very interesting things that in addition to the theory and the frameworks of effectuation or lean startup, these things have to be embedded. So in this way, we're able to connect with, right now, a person who can't speak and who can't write English, he's part of our course. He never could go to a school. So you're done this, how to use our local and indigenous material and develop that. Michael.
I'm sorry, I didn't understand the question. I understand what you're doing, but I do, if your question has to do with...
So the question is that, yeah. So the question is that we generally are obsessed with big theories. So I say that my recommendation, and I wanted your consent and your comments, that we should be trying to use our local poetry. For example, in our case, we use the poetry of our national poet Iqbal. For example, he says, अपनी दुनिया आप पैदा कर अगर जिंदों में है, the translation is that if you are alive, then create your own world and resources are within you. So this was already there in the poetry, and we were not using it. So these were some of the comments I just wanted to get your sort of concept. Yes.
No, I completely agree with you, Shahid. I think it is important to tailor what one's doing to local contexts. We don't do enough to distinguish contexts in entrepreneurship and in entrepreneurship research. And I think certainly having local case studies, local role models is important. I also think, however, that theories are one piece of the puzzle, but we need more evidence-based kinds of insights. And, you know, even something, and I'm not trying to be controversial here, but the almost blind embrace of the lean startup is a good example. We have no empirical evidence to support the effectiveness of the lean startup. We have no effective evidence to support the relative effectiveness of the lean startup in different contexts. And poverty is a case in point. It's a bag of things that have been thrown together. It's actually taken from work done by others long ago, Hamel and Prahalad. If you read the old work by Hamel and Prahalad, you'll see most of the lean startup methodology. But my point is not to be critical of them. The more power to them. They've certainly made a lot of money off their methodology. But the upshot is, where's the evidence? And whether it's that, I mean, with effectuation, I think that not just the people that pioneered effectuation, and I saw you had her on an earlier program, but many other scholars have started to do the kind of work that provides some evidence regarding effectual approaches, how they work hand in hand with causal approaches, the relative effectiveness of those approaches in different contexts. We need to do more, but I would just argue that it's not that you should throw out the theories at all. It's just we should do more to test those theories and those frameworks and those tools in our local context.